Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Unreal Engine 5 Virtua Co-op tutorial series. In this tutorial, we are going to make enemy counter system, and we will make our first person character to stop tracking the spline path when the enemies are spawned in the scene, and we will make our first person character to resume tracking the spline path when all the enemies in the scene are dead, like you are going to see. So we overlap, we stopped, enemies spawned, and after some time they self-destroy themselves, or we can say we killed them, and we were able to start the tracking of the spline path towards next trigger box, and in the same way towards the next one. So that's the main core loop of the virtual co-op game, and you can get the project files on my Patreon. So let's jump into the tutorial. So we are going to make enemy counter system. So uh, when the enemy spawns here, after a couple of seconds, that enemy AI will destroy himself automatically, and we will have a counter here in that handler enemy AI, which was responsible to for spawning the enemies. So when our first person character overlaps with that trigger box, he will stop following the spline path, and enemies will spawn here at the given location points, which you can increase or decrease from there. And when enemy spawns here, counter will increase by 1 here, and when enemy self destroy himself, counter here will reduce by 1. So when the counter reaches 0, it means all the enemies linked with that trigger box are dead. Now we can resume following the spline path towards next trigger box. So that is actually what we are going to do in this tutorial. So if you haven't watched the previous tutorial, please watch first. In that tutorial we worked on the enemy spawn system. So for that we have to go in our BP handler enemy, that one, virtual cop actors BP handler enemies AI. So here we need to create a new variable name enemies counter. It should be integer. Now here how we will count our enemies. Uh, in there we can increase the number of enemies to spawn. So uh, it means now 4 enemies will spawn, like that. And if we delete any one of them, it's deleted. Now delete another. Now only 2 enemies will spawn. So it means that variable inside that trigger box is responsible for telling our that handler enemy actor that how many enemies will spawn. So for that, and we were already sending that, and we already sent that spawn location array in the BP handler enemies actor in the previous tutorial. So here is it. So that's a trigger box. So when we overlaps, um, we were sending the spawn location array inside our PP handler enemies, and here we get that. So we need to create can we promote a variable, right? Spawn locations, and okay, from there we drag it, we get length, and it will give the total number of entries in the spawn location array, and we will simply set that. So now we have our total number of enemies spawn in that specific trigger box. So here we need to create a custom event. Name enemy AI dead. Because whenever the enemy um, dead or self destroy himself, we want to call that event, so it will reduce the one from the counter. So here minus subtract 1 and then set it to, and it is good to use clamp here, minimum 0 and maximum of any value, and from there if equal to less equal to branch. So when the enemy counter becomes 0 or less than 0, and I think that is not necessary, but okay. So we need to cast to first person pawn and get player pawn, and we will call the event spline tracking start. So if you remember, uh, we had two events there. One was to stop our spline tracking, and one was to start the spline tracking. Actually, these two things are playing or stopping our timeline, which was responsible uh, to tell us a distance where we have to set our first person character location and rotation also. So go back here. Now, whenever the enemy is dead, this event will call, and 1 will be minus from the enemy counter, and if it's less than 0 or it becomes equal to 0, we will call an event spline tracking to start the tracking. If it's false, then we will leave as it is. So now we have to call that event from our enemy. So inside the enemy, now from there we need to call uh, that event. So the part I'm going to do right now is not required for the Virtua game, but it is just for this tutorial to show you the resuming and stopping and resuming the spline tracking when the enemy's counter goes to 0. So in the next tutorial, we are going to delete that logic, which I am going to do now. So even here, set lifespan, uh, something like 3 seconds, or you can random floating range from 3 to 8, 6 seconds. Okay, and event and play. On the event and play, we get all actors of class and BP handler enemy CI for each loop. Event enemy edit. Okay. So now what? So when the enemy spawns, so when we reach here and overlaps with the trigger box, the both enemies will spawn here. So when the enemies spawn here, the counter will increase by 1 in their and that enemy handler actor. And um, definitely when we shoot the enemy, that enemy will be dead. But right now we haven't worked on the shooting or firing bullet fire any game mechanics. That's why we are testing our functionality, and that's why we are self destroying the enemy AI after some delay. So whenever that enemy AI character destroy himself or becomes dead, the counter here inside that handler BP actor will reduce by 1. So when it reaches to 0, so it means all the enemies linked to that trigger box are dead. So now it will resume the tracking of the spline, and it will make our character to go to the next point. So let's see, is it working fine or not. So in our one of the next tutorials, we are going to delete the logic, but for now it is just for the test purpose. So let's see, is it working fine or not. So we are going here, two enemies spawn. Now after some time they will self kill themselves. One of them, yes, you see. So you saw that. So when the enemy destroy themselves, we were able to move to the next point. So in the same way, we are now going to uh, set the number of enemies to spawn here. Let's spawn 3 enemies. Okay, one here, and one very near here. Okay, no, so we will do the same with there. And let me, I think so I need to, okay, yeah, there's, so similarly we can spawn, let's spawn only one enemy here. Okay, here. Now let's see, two enemies spawn here. They will self destroy themselves, and counter will, when the counter reaches 0, we were able to move to the next point. So okay, now you notice that the enemies didn't spawn here because we haven't give any reference here. So there is BP handler enemy AI reference. We need to give that reference. Okay, now we need to set that reference also here. The same way. Now it will work fine. Again, perfect. And now the three enemies spawn. Great, it's working fine now. The only one enemy is spawned here. And yes, now our logic is working fine. So you can say the core functionality of the virtual co-op game is kind of done here, because this is the main thing which were in the loop throughout the virtual co-op game. So now in the next tutorial, so let me do one thing more here, and let's me go here in the handler enemy, and in the viewport add me render text, so the next time we know what it is. So let me write here enemy AI handler and align to center, and let's make it big. Okay, so we have to increase the font size from where we, and I think that's the font size. So yes, and give it a color to red. So yes, the next time we will know that what actor it is. So now that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will work on actually shooting our enemy AI, and with the shooting, we will call that event enemy AI dead, and we will remove that logic because it was just for the testing purpose only for this tutorial. So you can get project files on my Patreon, and thank you for watching. Till next tutorial. Allah Hafiz.